Hello and welcome back to a very special edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, May 18th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined by 6 area local students from area schools who are here to tell us a little bit about what their high school experience has been like over the past 2 years in particular. As all of us know, back in March of 2020, the COVID pandemic upended life for just about everybody, and it certainly had a major impact on students going to school. Schools were shut down, there was remote learning, and all kinds of changes happened that made their high school experience very different from what it was going to be, and certainly for what most of us watching here today remember that part of our lives being. So it's great to have them with us to give us some feedback around that, and also to talk about some of the major issues that's on their minds. What are they thinking about? What are they talking about with their friends? And what are they looking forward to in the future? Really pleased to have with us today from Arlington Memorial High School, Emma Hoover and Maria O'Day. From Burton Academy, we're pleased to be joined by Claire Paxson and Jesse Dykes. And from Long Trail School, we have Damian Markovic and Mackenzie Smith. Folks, thank you again very much for making the time for our discussion today. Really looking forward to this. And I thought just to get us started, why don't we have each of you tell us a little bit about yourselves and kind of what you've been doing right through high school, not just the last 2 years, but the entire way through. I was thinking maybe the easiest way to go around this would be sort of alphabetically by school, just to keep it simple. So we'll start with our 2 folks from Arlington Memorial High School, and then go to our 2 students from Burton, and then finish up with our students from Long Trail. So Emma Hoover and Maria O'Day, I should say welcome back to GNAT, because I remember about 4 years ago, the 2 of you were on a state championship spelling team for Arlington High School, and I remember we did a little story about that. So it's good to see you again. So what's been going on over the last 4 years? Emma, get us started.
Okay, it's been a wild past 4 years. I've stayed busy with sports. I do soccer, basketball, and track. I am part of our school's environmental club, our anti-racism club. I like to be active in the community. And then, yeah, it's my senior year this year, so I'm taking a gap semester, and then next February I'll be attending Middlebury College.
All right. And Maria?
So I'm involved in soccer and track, and I'm also involved in a lot of like student council, student ambassadors things. And I do like being a member of the Arlington community is a extracurricular in and of itself. And next year I'll be going to Notre Dame.
Oh, great. Congratulations. All right, let's go over to Burton. Claire Paxson, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So for the past 4 years, my major things that I've been involved in is theater. I've been stage managing every single production there that I could possibly do. I'm involved in student council. I'm currently the student council president. I'm involved in what my school has as a freshman mentor, where you basically babysit a couple of freshmen for 20 minutes a day. And I do, oh wow, why am I blanking? Yeah, that's mostly it. Let's say that's most important. After high school, I'm going to University of North Carolina School of the Arts and majoring in stage managing.
All right, very good. And Jesse Dykes, your turn.
I've been really involved in any and all performing arts. I've sung in our musical this past spring. I've danced in our dance class, and I've performed on stage in most productions I could. I've been playing an instrument all 4 years, as well as before that. And as well as Claire, I'm a part of our freshman mentor program. After high school, I'll be going to Clarkson University for computer science.
All right, very good. All right, well, over to Long Trail School, and Damian Markovic, give us your little background.
the past 4 years, I've been trying to get myself involved with clubs that benefit the community. So I've been part of Ambassadors, National Honor Society. Montreal has like a peer emotional wellness group, which we use to help people in our school and in our community. I've been also getting myself involved with music, specifically since the pandemic. And this fall, I'm going to the Savannah College of Art and Design.
All right, terrific. And Mackenzie Smith.
Yes, so part of at Long Trail, I'm a student council president, and for like the past 4 years and before, I've been competing on an equestrian team, and I'm a part of a lot of the same clubs that Damien is part of. But yeah, really sort of hoping to engage in more community service as I transition into college years, and I'll be attending the University of Massachusetts at Amherst.
Wow, well, congratulations, all of you. Very impressive resumes there from high school. You were clearly way more active in high school than I ever was, I can tell you that much. But so I'm really glad to have you along for our chat today. So anyway, yeah, I guess I was just thinking we could just start having each of you talk to us a little bit about what it was like when back in March of 2020, we all learned a lot more about the COVID pandemic than we kind of were probably thinking we would ever learn about it. And probably back then in those initial days, I don't know, in my case, I remember thinking, oh, well, this is going to be 2 weeks where I have to work from home. Huh? How is that going to work? I'm not really sure, but it'll only be for a couple of weeks or maybe at most a month. And of course, 2 years and 2 months later, we're still kind of being impacted by it. But let's go back to those early days of March of 2020 when schools were closing down. And have you each tell us a little bit about what that experience was like. And I guess for simplicity's sake on my end, I'm just going to go around the screen from upper left to lower right. So Jesse Dykes, you get to start us off here, and Emma will go to you next. But what was it like back in March of 2020 when the pandemic upended the regular routine of school?
The pandemic hit just after our Prisms concert, which was a music concert we did that Friday. Monday we had school, Tuesday we were out. It was a little bit of a relief for me because I live an hour away, so that's 2 hours of my day I got back. But it was a little bit difficult to stay connected with the teacher because they had to keep wrangling everyone in class to keep them paying attention and doing classwork. I felt comfortable with it because I've been using technology for a large part of my life in general. But I could quite actively see others in the class struggling with it, and especially the teachers struggling to keep everyone up to date with it.
I had a similar experience in terms of the learning. So on the Thursday before school was shut down, we traveled to DC from Thursday to Sunday. So we were kind of in the midst of it right before we got home. And, we'd see people in hazmat suits and wearing masks, and we tried to be careful, but a lot of us were kind of like, it's not gonna be anything. And then we got home, and that's when about 3 weeks later, after we got home and were told that school was canceled, that we started online learning. And that's where, like Jesse said, you could see kids kind of struggling. I felt very privileged to have parents and people around me to support me and push me through, but it was still difficult nonetheless, watching teachers try to create lesson plans on Zoom that they'd never used before, or kids trying to find the motivation when they could really just turn their camera off and go on their phone if they wanted to.
All right, Damien, over to you.
Oh yeah, I mean, the main thing I remember is like right before quarantine happened over here, like a lot of people were, I would maybe not like in denial of it is the right terminology, but like we just didn't think, it could be something. I remember, even like a day before we were told to start this process of distance learning and everything, like teachers were still saying like, oh, like it's not going to get that bad or whatever. Yeah, and then I think, living in Vermont throughout the COVID pandemic has been kind of a privilege in the sense that, our state has had like the lowest amount of cases for most of the pandemic. And like quarantine for me specifically gave me a lot of time to like self-reflect and prioritize things like mental health and stuff. So I would say that's like the biggest positive that came out of it.
Okay. Claire Paxson, over to you.
Actually, before quarantine got instated, I was at a Model UN conference at Yale, and we were supposed to. It's like a 3-day event, and we had to leave early before the award ceremony because it was because Yale was shutting down, and they wanted to make sure that we were leaving. Like there was a scare that there was COVID started affecting some of the students there. So when we got back, everyone was like, oh yeah, the Model UN team definitely has COVID. So it was that, and we were all thinking oh no, that's not even a possibility. That's not. And then a couple weeks later, everything got shut down. I guess how I dealt with it, again, I feel really lucky because it gave me the time to catch up on work that I was slacking off on the previous months. So in my heart of hearts, I truly think that my sophomore grades would be worse if there wasn't quarantine, but that doesn't mean that there weren't negative effects. I felt very isolated and insular. I cut off a lot of my friends, not because I wanted to, I just didn't feel like I could, there was nothing for us to talk about. So I think that was more of, school wasn't the issue, it was more being away from everyone and forcing myself to or feeling like I had to kind of stick in my own little bubble.
Yeah, so right when sorry for the phone, right when the pandemic sort of started, I definitely agree with Damien in the fact that it felt like everyone sort of didn't understand the severity of the issue. I remember the day before it was announced, all of us are kind of we'll be back in 2 weeks and everything will sort of carry on for the rest of the school year. But that is definitely not what happened. And throughout that journey, especially in isolation, I think that it's really hard already growing up in a rural area and being so isolated from our friends and everyone to begin with, especially at our school, Long Trail, and a lot of schools in Vermont, I guess, in general, just pulling people from 45 minutes to an hour away. So not being able to sort of see friends as often as possible. But then now even being further isolated really created a sort of negative aspect of learning and sort of the cherished memories that we could have had as a group during those years.
So I was in DC when everything was shutting down. I remember the Capitol building, they wouldn't take visitors. It was just really weird to see the entire country shutting down for something that I really didn't think was going to be too much of an issue. So once school did shut down, once it transferred to online learning, it was super weird because school is just such a big part of your life, and all of a sudden it's 2 hours on a screen and then it's over, it's done. So that kind of forced me to focus on other things, people in my family weren't working anymore, so I got a chance to spend more time with them. But then at the same time, it was super hard to stay motivated in school. But I mean, coming back to school was definitely you're learning to count your blessings, oh my goodness, to see my teachers in person now. So I think it's given me a renewed gratitude for my education. That's been pretty cool.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what remote learning was like. I mean, that became very controversial, I guess. Some students seem to, I'm not sure if thrive is the right word on it, but seem to do okay with it. Others just seem to have no end of struggles and difficulties and felt that they fell behind in terms of what they would have been learning if they had been in person in class as was normal. Do you think each one of your schools was able to kind of adjust and pivot over to that as quickly as was reasonably possible? And I mean, what was that experience like? Was it okay, or was it like, oh man, that was awful? I just was wondering how you all kind of found that. And anyone who wants to start, Claire, it looks like you want to start.
Sure. So I think that for me, specifically with Burn Burton, I feel like there was definitely a push to make sure that it could be a long-term thing, because I think that they knew after like the first month that this was like, we're kind of doing it for the long haul. I mean, Jesse might disagree, but I think that there was like a clear effort by the teachers. They had a full like block set up on Friday to have it so we can meet with teachers individually. I'll be honest, sometimes I didn't actually utilize that because it just felt like, oh, well, now's it. Oh my God, sorry. I wasn't able to like fully utilize that, and I don't know how many kids actually did, but I think that there was a conscious effort to do that. I think that some of the biggest issues that came up were just like the class participating in discussions, and so like in these open form classes, it was really hard to like continue that and make that work. Like it's easier if it's a lecture class because you can just take notes and stuff, but if a teacher wants you to engage with them, it's way harder to do so on Zoom or like when you're not in the room with them.
I do think Claire's correct. Now that I'm thinking back to it, a lot of things were put in place that really helped out making our classes completely digital. But it wasn't perfect. Nothing was perfect. It helped some classes and it hurt some classes to be online. Like I remember my math class went pretty okay because the teacher visually doing the math on the screen is what students need to see, and then they had that Friday time to go go ask questions and get help. But for my social studies class, our teacher would put us in a breakout room and it'd be dead silence for 5 minutes.
I think for our school, especially like the classes that I was in the beginning, I think a lot of us were sort of excited to be online because it was a change and sort of we had a lot more leeway in terms of like the teachers not watching us so much and everything, and sort of getting that comfort of our own homes. But I felt like progressively as the rest of the year went on, I could feel myself getting lazier and lazier in terms of like how I engaged in my classes. And I can sympathize with Jesse a lot, like trying to play an instrument over Zoom. It was a lot of classes became really difficult to sort of have. Especially, well, a lot, like, I agree with, like, the sentiment that some classes flourished and some classes didn't. Like, I know for my math class, like, my math teacher was able to sort of make videos, like, the Khan Academy style and sort of really interact with the students as much, but some of the other teachers weren't able to sort of make that transition because they were so used to teaching a live class. But I thought that it was really interesting that like a lot of motivated students like myself really felt ourselves sort of slipping away from that passion towards school, which was honestly really sad. But we kind of got the hang of it, which is great.
I can't imagine the adaptation that you all had to have gone through negotiating that period of time. So then let's move forward and we get to the start of junior year back in September of 2020. School is back in session, as I remember it anyway. That's kind of by then, most schools were back in class. And we were kind of reaching a point where there looked like there would be vaccines available, although, of course, at that point, you folks weren't eligible to get them yet. So I guess what was it like then going forward from that first 6 months or so? Did college eventually, or high school eventually sort of kind of become back to normal again? Damien.
I just remember there being a lot of uncertainty in terms of the different policies to make going back into the building more safe. Like, I remember when we first went into school, it was like half of the school on one day and then the other half on the next day. I remember we'd like go on and off between like if we would need to wipe our desks down in between classes, or like how Like I remember, like a big thing was like the school buses, like they had to have all their windows down even in the winter, which there was a lot of uncertainty. So like people didn't really know like what was really effective in preventing COVID and what wasn't.
Interesting. But otherwise, it kind of did it seem like a gradual return to quote unquote normal, or was there still kind of lingering concerns about it even as case counts began to decline? And so saying the vaccines came in, so it seemed like we were going through a period of time back in the spring of 2021 when the worst was over, and life would kind of get back to normal, school would get back to normal, that you'd be able to have all the same events like sporting competitions and concerts and school plays and all of that, without having to worry about wearing masks or anything. And then of course along came the Delta and then the Omicron variants, which I would imagine kind of threw things kind of out of kilter again. Is that kind of roughly how it played out, or was it something different?
Yeah, I would agree. There was like a moment of like momentary bliss in like I would say October, and then like November, December, and January, like when the cases started to spike. I think people who before didn't like were kind of relaxing started to tense up again. And then with like the vaccines, I remember definitely were a very hopeful thing. I remember that I think it was like May 2021, where the CDC said you didn't need to wear a mask indoors anymore. That like I think a lot of people saw that as the end of the pandemic, or at least like the beginning of the end. And so it was just very like a lot of literal ups and downs, I guess, in terms of people's emotions and the cases.
What do you all think is going to be sort of the lasting legacy of all of this? I mean, I just can't help but feel that, as you may look back on it, you think, wow, we got cheated out of some stuff that we should have had, that other previous generations had. We weren't able to kind of do some of the things that our predecessors in high school took for granted. Is that a feeling, or do you feel like, well, this was such an unusual experience that maybe we also kind of learned something out of this that we wouldn't have learned in another way? And Claire, I see you had your hand up there, so I'll start with you.
Well, to be honest, I think that our class specifically, like now that we're graduating, like we had it happened in the best year that it could have for us. Like at least we weren't freshmen and we didn't know what was going on. Like we weren't even used to high school. At least we weren't juniors worrying about SATs and like having to start to prep for college. And thank God we weren't seniors. Like that was a complete level of uncertainty for so many of them. So hopefully, I mean, all of us will get to experience like prom and our final, like graduation and like final moments in our senior year. That can't be said for the classes before us. And I think that's something that I've noticed, especially being like a freshman mentor or whatever, like the incoming freshmen, like they're having a really tough time. Like it's really hard for them because they missed like pivotal moments in their middle school experience that prepares them for high school. And I think that that's going to be one of the biggest issues specifically at BBA and probably other high schools too, no matter where they are in the country. Like that, I think that will have lasting effects more so than our grade.
Emma, I see you nodding your head vigorously there. So you must feel the same way?
No, I definitely feel the same way. I have younger siblings. They're much younger, not quite in their freshman years yet, but just watching them through the pandemic kind of struggle and seeing their learning habits now. It's just interesting to see how the pandemic has affected that. But also too, I think you were talking about learning from it or feeling like we missed out. I think that there's a little bit of both in this situation, because I mean, we're obviously sad. Arlington being a small school, pretty much freshman through senior can participate in anything that they kind of want to. So like missing out on proms and watching our friends graduate, like that's a hard thing to miss out on. But I think also we have this new perspective that no other adults, at least now, kind of have, in terms of how we learned, how we had to adapt while our world is changing regardless of the pandemic. Yeah.
All right. Well, I give you all credit for working through all of that and navigating your way through high school under the conditions that were prevailing over the last couple of years. That's really quite remarkable. Your experience was vastly different from, I think, just about anybody else's that had come before. So, well, we'll see where it goes from here. But I thought we could maybe also talk a little bit about some of the things that are kind of on your minds as you are on the verge of this sort of milestone in life, high school graduation. It's certainly one of those, periods of time when, one chapter ends, another begins. And I guess I just wondered if you would all like to talk a little bit about, what are some of the concerns or hopes or things you feel optimistic about looking forward. I mean, and I'll just get started with a topic that I understand anyway from secondhand information anyway is one that is on the minds of a lot of members of your peer group and your generation. That's climate change. We hear an awful lot about the needing to keep the temperature from rising more than 2 degrees centigrade by 2030. Otherwise, we're going to hit a tipping point where it'll be very difficult to roll back that. And I guess I just wondered if, again, we could just sort of go around the room. And Maria, I'll start with you, go in the opposite direction that I did the first time. I mean, is that something that you either worry about or think is manageable, or solutions will be found to deal with that?
Well, I hope coming out of this pandemic, one major thing that we can take away from it is we need to stop politicizing science. We need to just look at science and not really care about what we can do with the science to advance our political interests. I think that could be such a big deal in terms of climate change. If we can finally stop making a party platform and just a human issue, the way we should have with COVID, I think that could be really beneficial to society.
Okay, Mackenzie.
Yeah, I completely agree with those sentiments. I honestly think that growing up in this time, that it's really scary, honestly, thinking about what the future is gonna look like. I'm definitely someone who likes to plan ahead and sort of look to the future, but with all of this going on, it's really scary because, I mean, honestly, every day I hear jokes about not even getting to have a life past that 2030, 2050, that sort of time period, and sort of the planet dying before then. And it's really sad to think that an issue like climate change has been so politicized because it has created so much controversy that is really unnecessary. But it's also in a way really reassuring because I know that a lot of schools have clubs, and I think that our generation is really focused on creating change and sort of hoping to try and prevent the problem as much as possible. I know that environmental science is a huge up and coming major that a lot of people are choosing to major in, and so it's scary, but I have hope and trust in our generation.
And Claire.
I would say that you're being asked to plan out your life and to make these large choices, and you're excited about those things, but then you have to consider will my job or my life or what I plan to do be completely obsolete by the time that we reach a tipping point like that? I think that that's a pretty worrying thing, especially for me. I do have to say though, I think that something that's really important that we start doing in this period where we have so little time left. Like the people that are going to be affected by this at first and at their most vulnerable are usually people outside of our bubble and in the USA. So I think that one of the most important aspects is learning about that and understanding that and having empathy about that, because we're not going to change until it reaches us, or that's the mindset. And by then it will probably be too late. So.
Damien, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with Claire. Like a lot of people who are in these positions of power to make decisions around this climate crisis, I think at least some of them don't see it as severe if it physically is not close to them, or like in terms of time is not close to them. So I think like a really important thing to do is, I mean, like I think thankfully like our new generation is like getting a lot of new perspectives thanks to social media and internet and stuff like that. So they're already growing up with learning about situations like climate refugees, like what they're going through now and stuff like that. And I think it kind of creates a greater web of empathy from the start.
And Emma, over to you then.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of the sentiments of everybody that's spoken so far. Yeah, it's pretty scary to see people in power and their neglect of the severity of climate change. Just from our point of view, as Claire was saying, we're going to have to make these big decisions and sacrifices, but there's so much unknown. Like, will this affect us? Is it even ethical to think about having kids? What will our careers look like? What will our homes look like? So it's just scary in that way. But yeah, as everyone has said, I think our generation is pretty adamant about combating climate change in any way that we can. And I think that that's hopeful.
I think I've heard more than I've seen about climate change, specifically with regards to warnings and proposed solutions. But I haven't seen a lot of things go through. So in some regard, it does feel alien almost, because we haven't seen the effects and I haven't seen too much action. And hopefully we are the generation that'll help that.
Do you feel like the current group of political leaders or people who are in positions of power, whether it's in politics or in business, have just sort of dropped the ball on this completely? Either they just sort of either in denial about it, or they just feel like this is like something that's still 20, 30, 40 years down the road. We'll figure it out before it gets to be irreversible. Or do you feel like people are taking it seriously? I'm talking about generations before you that grew up in a time when climate change was nothing that anybody ever talked about or heard about, really, until 1980s or 1990s, I guess. Or do you feel like there's some responsibility that attaches to people who came before you?
I think that unfortunately a lot of people and companies that have a lot of power, not just within the United States, but around the world, sort of are in denial about the issue of climate change because it's not financially a positive for them. A lot of the changes that I think that our country needs to make and other countries need to make require people to think more about how they use products. And I think that there are a lot of people, especially younger activists, that are sort of standing up and making change. But the problem is that to make change, a lot of people have to make noise. And within our small communities in Vermont, we can do the best that we can, and we can put on protests and marches. But if we want to make actual change, like the whole world needs to jump on that bandwagon as well, because nothing's really going to change unless the whole society sort of creates a shift. But yeah.
All right. Well, that's really interesting to hear your views on that. Let me throw another question your way, and this one was one I really wasn't anticipating asking, but we had a very tragic event happen in Buffalo, New York last weekend. It was a mass shooting that took place, and it reminded me a lot of 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago. There was a shooting in a high school in Florida, in Parkland, Florida. And I remember at that time, a lot of students, folks who were your age at that point, rallying to, say, hey, this just can't continue. That we can't go on having these kinds of events happening and to the point where people get just sort of numbed by it. And yet, time and time again, it seems like nothing ever happens. There's no ban on assault weapons that's enacted by Congress. There's no regulations around who can buy guns beyond basic shotguns, let's say, that people would use for deer hunting. And I guess I just wondered kind of how did you folks all react to that event or feel like, we just can't keep doing business the way we've been doing business for the last 20 or so years, ever since, let's say, the horrible event in Columbine in Colorado. Is there something that just needs to happen to keep these things from continuing? Or is it just going to be up to individuals one by one to kind of try and come up with their own solutions? Damien, we'll start with you.
I mean, yeah, especially with the Buffalo shooting, it was very heartbreaking to hear, especially because it's so close to where I live. The perpetrator was my age, and I personally don't think I can even. There's so many different sides to the gun control problem that I don't think I could even come to a conclusion on like what's best for that. But I do think that I think a really good step in the right direction is mental health support. And because that seems to be like the root of a lot of these shootings is lack of emotional and mental support. And so I feel like that's a real, that might not be the only solution, but it's definitely, I think, is a significant step into the right direction.
One of the things that we can definitely start out with is a full-on ban of automatic assault rifles. Like, you can argue that, I can't personally find an argument on why any just normal American citizen would need one. You can't really use it for hunting. If you try to shoot a deer, you're going to obliterate it. What else is it for other than just to have it or to use it for something that is just inherently unethical? So I think with that, and that's a difficult thing, but it's easier to ban that, but it's easier to start that conversation when you're not going full cold turkey or something than being sorry, no guns, or full gun control for every type of gun. But the situation in Buffalo, I think that also is intrinsically linked to racism within our country, and that itself is an even bigger beast that it feels almost impossible to deal with. So it's because it's so rooted within our society, and even here in Vermont, I think that is definitely a huge part of the conversation with what happened in Buffalo, along with the fact that this person, this 18-year-old kid with history and past of not only problematic, but super harmful behavior, was able to acquire something like this.
Anytime I try and come up with some logical conclusion, some logical, I don't want to say correction, but some solution, there's always another piece of the problem that comes following in on it. There's no perfect solution to the issue, which makes it difficult to think about.
It's just these things are just so horrific, sad, and I think other than the victims, other than just how it's like just the worst thing mankind could do to another person. Like, it's awful. And the worst part is just that it exposes so much that's wrong with the world. Like, there's pharmaceuticals, mental health, gun control, race, like there's a million other factors. And I think that's the reason why we can't seem to find a solution, is because if you want to attack one, like a million others raise their heads. So it's just, you can't tackle it. And it's going to take a huge societal change to go in the right direction in that term.
Yeah, indeed. Well, certainly a very complicated question, and one that's been around for a long time. It'll be interesting to see how we do wind up working our way through it. Let me just ask you all about one other thing here that can't help but ask. Social media, often pointed to as a big factor in why we are such a divided and divisive society. I don't know if you're all on TikTok or whatever your favorite platform is these days. I'm sure it's not Facebook. I gather that's like sort of so passe that we don't even deal with it anymore. But I guess, what do you all think about social media? Or is it a net good or a net negative by the time you shake everything off? I mean, on the one hand, it gives us an opportunity to connect with people and learn things and feel like we're part of a community of some sort or another. On the other hand, clearly there's an awful lot of misinformation that gets distributed around out there, and sometimes it's hard to sift through what's accurate and what's not. I guess, I mean, if you were the emperor of the social media world, what things would you like to see changed? Should there be, like, for instance, limits on freedom of speech? Should you not be able to just say whatever it is you want to say, even if it's just, really stuff that's pretty crazy and off the wall? Or is it, hey, the genius of the whole thing is that it is a free and open kind of system that basically allows you to kind of really vent, if that's what you want to do?
One of the things that I've seen come about with social media specifically is political echo chambers, where people with one political view will only be exposed, or for the majority of the time be exposed to media that supports their ideals. And this, it just kind of makes their perception of a certain topic even more extreme in whatever way they view it. And if I was the emperor of all social medias, it might just come down to taking out the whatever algorithm it is that proposes specifically material that is suited for you. Yes, it's useful, but it also causes a lot of harm in creating echo chambers where people get stuck and they don't have a way out because they don't want a way out.
I would definitely agree with that. I also think too that a big issue on social media right now is especially like the spread of misinformation, and just seeing that, not really knowing what's true, what isn't true. I think that's really difficult, especially for people who maybe don't have the motivation or interest to look into if what they're reading is true or not, because then I think that just perpetuates the situation. But yeah, if there was some way to keep the misinformation, I guess, from spreading, I think that would be useful. But there's also an element of social media. I mean, in some ways it's great, but I think there's also an addictive kind of aspect to it, that it's hard for you to kind of pull away from it in any way, or for anything to really be changed. So yeah, I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
I guess in the context of like what I've seen like recently, like the fact that like Elon Musk wants to buy Twitter, and his main platform with doing that is like, well, we'll just let it be anything, really. I think that is scary, especially after what we've seen in America specifically, like after the 2016 elections and in the 2020 elections. Like that that isn't sustainable if we want to create a society that is able to move forward in an ethical and understanding, like one that makes sense and that will bring us forward to something better than where we are now. I think that if we just say that social media is a free reign and the internet's a free reign, like it was back when it came, like when it was first started, like in the 90s or something like that, moving in, like there were so many spaces, and there are still so many spaces where, and this isn't just about political parties, where like like thoughts and ideas that are inherently not good, I guess, like white supremacy, like those are able to fester and those are able to thrive because suddenly they're like, well, I don't have to like project this image out to the people around me. If I want to find people in the outside world like this, I can be anonymous online and find it, because who's going to find out? I think that's one of the biggest issues.
All right, well, before we move on to our last question, I wanted to just sort of throw out the thought, are there any other topics that are kind of really top of mind for you all as you are on the verge of getting that long-awaited diploma? Is there anything that we haven't discussed? We just talked about 3 points here, and I'm sure there's probably about 3 dozen others that we could probably you've thought about or wondered about, from time to time. I guess anything that you think the adult viewers out there ought to know is sort of kind of something you think about or talk about with your friends that they should be aware of. Maria.
I think like inflation and specifically the cost of college has been like a huge issue this year, especially for me. So I think like college has gotten so expensive that like the fact that I had to go there to pay for my education is, I think, points out a weakness in our college system, our education system, and the fact that these more affordable options aren't there.
Well, college loan debt is certainly a big deal, isn't it? I'm sure it's something you've all kind of gone, oh my God. But is that a factor, a big factor on all of your minds going forward? Yeah, it would be on mine, I can guarantee you. When I find myself reflecting back on when I went to college, multiple decades ago, tuition at UVM was $1,000 a semester if you were a Vermont resident. And that, of course, was in $1970, so indexing for inflation, it's not quite as crazy as it might sound initially, but between, part-time jobs and stuff, I was able to leave college with no debt at all. And that doesn't sound like it's the case with the way it works out anymore for a lot of people, because the numbers are just way beyond that. No matter how many part-time jobs you get, it'll never be enough. Final round of questions before we close. I'm just curious, are any of you planning on staying in Vermont, or you're thinking of returning to Vermont after college perhaps, or whatever it is you might be going on to? I mean, there's a big question in Vermont about the demographics of the state. We're an aging state, the second oldest. I think we're still a little bit behind Maine, but not by much. I guess I just wondered, what would make Vermont an attractive place for you to come back to, let's say when you're all in your 20s and maybe have a career started? What would it take to make that happen? Jesse.
I already really enjoy it here because I enjoy the quiet nights. I enjoy the sunlight and the clear skies and the spaced out area. And the biggest problem is the internet connection, because as someone going into computer science, if I'm going to be programming websites or games or anything, I'm going to have to be sending that over the internet. And if it's not good, then my work is going to be interrupted. That's probably my biggest problem. I also like it where it's cold, and here, not right now, but usually it's pretty cold.
All right, we'll go around the screen again. So Emma, you're next.
I really like living in Vermont. I like the nature, it's just pretty perfect in terms of scenery. One thing though I would say is like if I'm coming back and trying to like settle down, live a life, housing really right now is really, really expensive, and I think that would be something that would be really alarming for me. Um, Other than that though, there's nothing I can really think of, no.
Yeah, even though I'm moving to Georgia in like a few months, I definitely plan on visiting Vermont frequently in the future. And I think just like a question on my mind for like Vermont's future is like, we've been able to like keep a lot of local businesses in this state thriving. There's no billboards allowed, et cetera. So if those if that still is preserved and like the emphasis on supporting like the nature in the state and everything is still there in the future, then I would love to visit here as much as I can.
Okay, Maria, we'll go down to you next.
I think I would be so incredibly lucky if I end up living in Vermont. Like if my career path takes me here, it would just be the greatest thing ever. But I mean, I have no idea. I can't really plan. But I love Vermont so much.
Echo Damien's sentiments. I think that like the communal aspect of Vermont as a whole is what makes it really special. Having the rural aspects of having tight-knit communities, not just within like our school populations, but just as like a whole is really special. And so I'm hoping that in the future, Vermont doesn't sort of fall in line with a lot of the rest of the states and sort of become more industrialized and sort of lose what makes it so special. Like there's a reason why so many people come here later in life to sort of just escape that hustle and bustle and sort of really enjoy like the aspect of nature. And I think that it really speaks a lot to our earlier talk about climate change and sort of just like what the future is going to look like, and sort of hope that Vermont is able to sort of pull through, because growing up with these beautiful landscapes and mountain ranges, just not getting to have that in the future would be devastating.
I think for me personally, moving back to Vermont, since I'm planning on going into like the theater industry, up here we have lovely theaters around, but within a system that is so like it's constantly changing and it's constantly moving and it's kind of constantly going in and out of fashion. It'd be hard to move some back here because here it's that like tenfold. But like I've moved around a lot. So Vermont is is the best place I've ever lived. Like I love it here. Like I enjoy it thoroughly. But I think like if I was ever to move back to Vermont, I would need to, like early in life, I would have to either change my career path, which might happen, or I'd probably move here when I was like 70.
Yes, it reminds me of when I finished at UVM, I went back to New York City, which is where I'm from originally. I never even thought about staying in Vermont. I wound up coming back here again about 15 years after that, so you never can tell. Life has a lot of interesting twists and turns to offer. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for now, but once again, I want to thank all of our 6 student panelists here for being with us and making the time on a beautiful afternoon to share their thinking with us. From Arlington Memorial High School, really pleased to have with us today Emma Hoover and Maria O'Day, Claire Paxson and Jesse Dykes from Burn Burton Academy, and Damien Markovic and Mackenzie Smith from Long Trail School. Folks, thanks again very much for being with us and sharing your thinking with us, and really appreciate hearing from you. It was very interesting, eye-opening in many ways. And I hope that all of you who've been watching our program today have found it interesting as well. Really appreciate you being with us. I'm sure you are impressed by these students as I have been. And well, we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day. Thank you.